All right, so had a great time with everybody the other night at the studio hang, getting to know you guys, stuffing people full of chocolate and bonbons and cookies. Was a blast. And then I think this was maybe one of the highlights of the evening, capturing this new cover song. I don't know, it's fantastic. So a lot of interesting feedback and stuff there in the studio. Had a great time. So really great. So our objective today is a couple things. I want to talk about how we shoot, light, and frame a video interview and some of the options that we have there, how close or far to make the camera, how to light and how to avoid that, as well as how to use framing of the environment and leading lines to guide us to. And then also, if you want to download this one, I'm going to have you do it as well. We're going to capture our video with one phone and have you use your partner's phone to capture good audio. And then we will marry them together back in Premiere. So I'm going to capture this first and just kind of walk you through this process. So here in Premiere, I've got something we shot, a semester or two ago. And what you can see is that we just shot this with two different students' phones. So in this case, you can see this one shot. It's about a medium shot from my waist up to my head. And you can see in this case, even when I play it back or turn things up, and how would you describe the sound listening to me talk?
Hi, my name is Nathan Adam. I'm a professor here at Bell.
Yeah, it's pretty far away because the camera looks like it's maybe 6 or 8 feet away. Anything else?
Belong in cinema, television, and media. I teach the courses on.
A lot of room noise. We can hear the of the air conditioning. We can hear the kind of reflective ambience of the space. And then even with this second student's camera that looks a fair amount better, the framing visually is not quite what we want, but this was about capturing good audio. And if I take this piece and I play it too about the same distance away, how does that audio sound? Hang on.
And doing this interview, we're going to be learning how to.
Same thing, right? Still far away, doesn't sound great. Meanwhile, you can tell I've got a little AirPod here in my right ear, and I'm capturing that audio to a voice memo on my own phone sitting. So we've got a third phone that's sitting there just capturing the audio from my AirPod to serve as essentially an inexpensive wireless lavalier mic. Let's see if that sounds the same.
Hi, my name is Nathan Adam. I'm a professor here at Belmont in
How does
cinema,
that sound?
television, and media.
Much, what? A lot less room noise. It's a little bit closer. It's a lot closer. It sounds really close. It's a little thin. The AirPods are not known for having the best audio quality. They're not trying to capture the full range of audio quality. They're just trying to mostly focus on the frequencies of the human voice. But you hear it does give us a much
Teach the courses on intro.
cleaner sound than we otherwise would have. So what can we do? Well, the one simple thing we can do is we can take those clips. Let's say I chose to use this one as my main camera. I can pop that into my timeline. Jump back over here and put this together. So now with both of those clips in the timeline, the simplest thing that always works is you'll notice I slated the take right at the beginning. So by saying what's happening on both the camera and the audio that was recorded, and providing a nice big spike there, I have the poor audio that was captured with the camera, but I can take this good audio, drag and drop it into place, look for that spike, and then arrange them accordingly. By zooming in on that spike here on my camera, I can just grab this one now and use command left and right arrow to nudge it until it's exactly in place, where the spike happens at the same time for both of them. And then I can mute that original audio to see and watch my lip sync and make sure it still looks correct.
Hi, my name is Nathan Adam. I'm a professor here at Belmont in
Makes a
cinema,
big difference.
television, and media.
So now all of a sudden, anybody with a set of AirPods or earbuds can get a good sounding audio
To digital.
for their interview. Now, there are other options too. What would we do though once we have this? I'll show you the other options. Once you have this in a place where they were connected well, I would simply come in to everything before that, switch to my razor blade tool with the cut or the C key, cut them at the same place and delete everything before. Then what we want to do is we want to replace the bad audio on this clip with the good audio on this one. So I'm going to select these two clips, the video with its linked audio, right click on it, and scroll down until I see unlink. When I unlink them, now you'll notice that they're separated, and I can select and delete the bad audio. Then I can select the good audio and either drag it up into place, making sure not to move it earlier or later, or just select it and the option up and down arrows move it between tracks. Then once that's in place, if I want them to act like they're one clip again, I simply select both, right click on them, and choose to link. And now you'll see that they're edited all as a single video clip. So that's a quick and dirty and easy way of capturing good audio, even if you don't have anything but a set of AirPods. Gotta remember to unmute the mic.
Adam, I'm a professor here at Belmont in.
Now, how could we improve this framing? So we can see a couple of problems with this as is. This framing, right now I'm framed here in the center of the image. I'm not following any of the rule of thirds, so we're going to talk about those. Brian, don't let me forget to get you on the attendance. But if you want to do a lot more of this, we have other options too. Now, I just loaned out my USB mic, but it's possible. How many of you think you're going to be shooting more videos or interviews of people in the future? Like you enjoy the process, okay? So if that was the case, you're going to want to do a couple things. You can either use your AirPods, but I put a link here to where in the AirPods, if you go and you look, go ahead and pop open your phone real quick. When you open your voice memos to capture, by default, they're going to capture from the built-in microphone. That's okay if you have no other option. Simply using your second microphone or your second phone to capture audio and setting it beside your interviewee is going to give you a much closer, much better sounding audio than a microphone that's several feet away. The reason is because sound volume drops by half with every doubling of the distance. So a microphone that's only a foot from your mouth because it's sitting right beside you in the chair, or if you're willing to go full TikTok, you can simply hold your phone like a microphone and speak into it that way. Ideally, it doesn't have a big floppy case like this that would be kind of distracting, but at the very least, it will give you good audio. You might want to make sure it's not moving around, but anything closer than your camera, which might be 4 or 5 feet away, is going to be better. If you want to go even higher quality than that, you can come to Amazon and you live in this amazing time in history where you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars to get a decent lavalier. I've brought 2 different examples here. One that I bought for, I think, 34 bucks. This looks like it's the same one. It comes with a little receiver, like you see right here, that plugs directly into your iPhone. And then the lavalier can be turned on, powered on by turning it, and it charges with a built-in battery directly off USB-C. And then you can simply clip it onto the shirt, and your camera app or your audio voice memos will now use that by default. It's fantastic. It's a quick way to capture good audio. You want to make sure it says that it's found a USB accessory and connected that. But if you're going to be doing a lot of this, that's a great way to do it. The only downsides I've found to these, they don't have a lot of dynamic range. So if you've got somebody that gets quiet and then really loud, you can still have to where that loud parts will get kind of crunchy or a little bit distorted. But for a quiet, normal spoken interview, something like this works great, and they're incredibly affordable. If, however, you do a lot of things like this and you're like me, where you routinely show up and realize you have forgotten to charge the little microphone, fortunately they do charge pretty quick, but there's other options too. iPhone Lav Mic. A search for that will reveal a bazillion different options, but the one I picked up recently was something like this, not these. The reason these are so expensive at $180 is because they also have internal recorders in each microphone. The reason for that is occasionally if you're in an area with a lot of radio activity or lots of cell phones or Wi-Fi networks, sometimes these little guys will have dropouts. And if that's your only audio that's getting captured to the camera, having little bits of words occasionally get dropped out or distorted is not ideal. If you go all the way up to something like this, it should have either longer range or a lot of times it'll actually capture the audio inside. Another one that is very popular and sounds pretty great are the DJI ones. Now they get up very expensive if you want to have something that works at an even more robust level. But for most simple little interviews, you can just go with the little things like you had there. What I do like about this one that I've got here, Ulanzi, is it comes with its own charger case. So similar to your AirPods, if you're doing a lot of these, it has both the receiver, which looks very similar to what we saw in the other one, as well as the two microphones that can just be clipped on, but they charge themselves in the case. So you can simply plug one USB-C cable in and get a good charge and always have mics ready to go. Plus, this one, I think for $50 came with two of these. Oh yeah, same one. So $50, just different color. Came with two of these, and as a result, you can actually have a two-person interview and capture your own audio as well as theirs, and it'll capture one person to the right side and one person to the left side of the microphone. Yes?
And where's the most ideal placement?
Great question. Most ideal placement is wherever you can put it that it's not going to be a problem. So simply clipping it anywhere within distance to their face. It's not going to pick up appreciably different from here than it will if you put it right here. But do remember that with every doubling of the distance, the volume drops. So the difference between putting it here and here is not much, but here and over here, it's going to receive half the volume. So every time you double that distance, the volume cuts in half. These microphones are what we call omnidirectional, meaning they just pick up in all directions. So if you simply clip it someplace nice and consistent, you're going to get a great sound. Cool. Other questions about that? Michaela?
Are we allowed to use, like, I have a microphone and just record it to Pro Tools?
You can use any mic, absolutely, and record to Pro Tools. So I know some people have like home podcasting setups or a USB mic, and they're just using that mic to capture the person, and then they're using their camera to capture the video, and then they just synchronize them in Premiere afterwards. Now, okay, yes, I did just show you guys how to pull those in and synchronize. Now I'm going to show you one other way to do this in here, but I've noticed it's been crashing Premiere when I do it. So let me just show it to you because it is great when it works, but we did it with a student's computer and it failed there too. If you have your audio and your video and the audio for it, you can right click on them, and assuming they both started around the same time and even ended around the same time, so one doesn't have 2 minutes of random talking before that they both started, you can right click on them and choose merge clips, and it'll say, okay, I'm going to make a new clip, add the word merged to it, and you can say synchronized by the audio, and then remove the audio from the video clip using essentially only the new audio. And when you say okay there, boom, it creates this new video clip.
Okay. Adam,
And you can see the audio started before the video,
and
but it's now replaced all of that. So that's another thing you can do. However, I'm going to try just putting it down on the timeline, and let's see if it crashes Premiere. It didn't yet. And it also didn't bring in the video. So let's just go with the old manual method of dragging in our video clip, dragging in our audio clip, looking for that spike that you hopefully recorded, moving them until they're in place, delete the bad audio. Actually, you can even just take this good audio, and if you move it over the top, that removes the old audio, and now you can right click and link them. Let's unlink and then right click and link. So once you've done that, I just come in with my cut tool, chop off the excess bits, and you've got your interview ready to be edited. Questions about that process? Now, there's a few other things we can do. I'm going to show you guys how to afterwards. And next time in class, we're going to look at how to fix some of the most common problems, as well as how to animate any still photos that you put into your video so that they have a little bit more life and interest. For example, right here, this framing, we were not talking about framing on this particular day. You can tell the framing is not ideal. What's wrong with the framing of this shot? I'm backlit. So by putting a bright source of light, namely the sun, behind me, you can see that whoever's, I think it was an Android phone, was really struggling to actually achieve both. However, if you open up this one or this other one, you'll notice that the dynamic range was a little bit better. Maybe the lens was a little bit cleaner, and it's able to, it's a terrible expression on my face, but it's able to handle the dynamics a little bit better between the darks and lights, but still avoiding bright backlights behind your crowd is better. This one also had some decent framing, except the main thing is that I'm very close to the background. The more you can move the person away from the background, the better the shot is going to be, the deeper the shot is going to be. And you're going to have a couple other options on your phone as well. Let me open this up and show. So here you can see, depending on your phone, you might have, if you have an iPhone 13 or 14, you have the option for what they call cinematic mode. Cinematic mode does a pretty great job of creating a faux depth of field, shallow depth of field effect. So you notice that the people in the background, the distractions in the background, are now blurred out. In regular video mode, on the other hand,
Capture a second or two.
you have a very different look and feel. In regular video mode, any distractions in the background suddenly become very distracting. Any movement, messy cables, etc. You notice the difference between them is not subtle.
Isaac's noticed that if in here, look.
So if you have a cinematic mode option, it's definitely better. I would also say the cameras got so improved by the iPhone 13 or 14 that if you're shooting with just a collection of phones, using the newest one is going to typically yield the best results. There was a substantial improvement in the 13 to 14.
And capture a
If you don't have any option though, using regular video mode is okay, but cinematic mode is going to give you something that looks much more professional with less distractions in the background. Now, let's look at the difference between some of these other things I just shot in the last class. Here you can see that by moving the camera a lot closer, we have a lot less issues with the differences in the light. Now you notice this backlighting is not simultaneously lighting him like the sun from one side and competing with the lights inside the room on the other side. By simply moving this person forward away from those windows, now we're able to get a much more consistent look. In addition, they dominate the frame. And by putting them this much closer, we also get a couple other advantages. Look at the environment around him. What does every line in this room point to? The subject. So by bringing the person closer and then looking around at our environment and looking at where do the lines go, we see we got a much more interesting and a much better looking quality of image that also, because I flipped on cinematic mode, is not distracting. In this case, we have another shot we made use of framing. Now this is just with standard video mode. You see that there's still all the distractions in the background. I probably would have wanted to remove this chair so it wasn't distracting, but we also framed close enough to be able to frame him with this window around him and these windows on both sides. This is just somebody from the last class.
If I was going to record in this room,
Now you notice in this case, similar, by slightly adjusting our positioning, we still could have cleaned up the background, removing some of these things, but we framed him in, but this looks a little awkward. Can anyone tell me why? Well, his body is facing this way. His head is facing the opposite way. So it doesn't create a sense of what we call looking room or leading room. So typically when we're talking about interview framing, if you just Google that, you can get some really great simple ideas about how to do it. There's really two approaches. One, a simple, what we call talking headshot, looks much more like the news or like a content creator that's trying to get new subscriptions on their YouTube channel. So in this case, having somebody sit directly in the middle of the frame, what do you notice about their background? Are they close to the background or are they far away? Margot, I'll ask Margot. Far away. The farther away they are from the background, the more it creates depth. The closer they are to the background, the less depth that gets created. If you have the use of a shallow depth of field like the cinematic mode, then it can still make it seem like a deeper image because our eyes tend to see it that way as well. But most of the time, people are not going to want to look directly into the camera. If you're interviewing somebody, unless they're used to being on camera, people find it very uncomfortable to stare directly into it. As a result, we utilize what we call looking room or leading room. And that is, we leave the empty space in the direction that they're looking because they're typically looking at us standing right to the side of the camera. So they can have a natural conversation with us. And that, as a result, we can make use of these leading lines. But also take note of not just the looking room, but the headroom. How much distance is there between the top of their head and the top of the frame? A lot or little? Not very much, right? What looks different between this shot and this shot? Yeah, the amount of headroom is dramatically different. What is the difference in how you feel looking at a shot like this? How does the subject appear to you? Tiny, maybe either unimportant or like you're trying to communicate that maybe this person was a victim or something. If you watch a lot of Netflix documentaries, you'll notice that sometimes they break the boundaries for this purpose. They break these rules to create a specific feeling. If the person was like suffered some sort of catastrophe or whatever, or they're telling some sort of uncomfortable story, sometimes they will cut to the occasional shot of the person just feeling dwarfed by their environment. Or if you look at something like this, you can see just how different these things look. This side shot is interesting as a cutaway, but would it make sense as your primary shot when you're interviewing them? Not unless they're supposed to be in witness protection program. This one, however, has plenty of looking room and leading room out front. They're aligned on the rule of thirds, with the eyes being on that top rule of thirds line and the person located on the other side. But even in this case, you see similar sort of thing. Top eyes on the top rule of thirds line, very little headroom, a nice tight, what we call a medium close-up shot, and you can see just how consistent that is. So that's one of the key things you want to look for unless you have somebody that is happy and willing to speak directly to the camera. Most of you should be shooting things that look more like this. Notice none of them are sitting super close to their background. Actually, this one kind of is, and how does it feel? Even with the shallow depth of field, does that background feel cluttered, kind of claustrophobic, a little bit close and squished in? Absolutely. How about this one? Kind of amateurish, not very professional. We've just got kind of a bland background, but it's also really close to him. So when we're looking at this, we want to establish a couple things. The farther back we can keep the background, even in regular video mode, the more it will be blurred out. In regular video mode, you got to get that background quite a ways back before it starts to blur. Cinematic mode will do a pretty good job though. But anytime you put someone really close, in fact, you'll notice in all of these, there's almost none where the background is really close. This example being a little bit different, but you can see the more cluttered that background is, the more you have to have that shallow depth of field. Otherwise, it just gets really cluttered in the frame. Draws your eyes different ways. So what we're going to do today is go and try some different things. Here was one that they were shooting. This was the initial shot that students in the previous class shot. How does this frame make you feel, or make our interview subject feel to the viewer? Is he large? Is he small? Is he dominating the frame? So he's pretty small in the frame. Yep. And if we play through this, you can see how even just a little bit of camera movement can make a big difference. Let's watch this.
Feel like they're a long ways away, but even still, a little bit of.
You notice just by moving from here over to here, do you see how the framing changes? Over here, it's just clutter everywhere, and the windows are not really even being put to use. If we move just a little bit farther over, what do we get? Now at least he's framed by this window and these. Is our camera close enough, or should it be closer? I probably would move closer. Now if you're watching something like a longer documentary on Netflix or something, you'll see a lot of times they do both. They'll shoot one really big wide angle, but then they also have a second camera that they can cut into that's much closer. That gives you some variety in being able to see what they look like far back versus much closer. Creates a very different feel. But let's look at some of these others. How about where you place the camera level-wise? Should we place it high or low? Well, let's look.
Goes a long way, and this would be kind of interesting. If you go too low.
How does it change when you put the camera really low? It also feels awkward. So if you go too low, especially in this situation with somebody sitting down. So it's not really, I mean, in this case, he definitely seems larger, but because we're so far back, he seems kind of small. Whereas, what if I put the camera up here? So now I'm above eye level looking down. Now how does the viewer seem, or the subject seem? Very small, and surrounded by chairs, he seems smaller than ever. Compare that only to this, and now we have a much more dominant subject, but what's the problem with our headroom? Probably got a little too much headroom because his eyes are not quite on that top rule of thirds. So we've got a little too much headroom there. But by moving down slightly and moving my camera over slightly, what happens? We've got the right amount of headroom. He's definitely, I would prefer him closer to this rule of thirds over on the side, but I was just grabbing their camera and moving it. He's framed well by this background picture and framed by these, and we've eliminated at least some of the distraction of a gazillion chairs. You can see how that feels very different. And now, as I put it right below eye level, he can look a little bit bigger or more large in the frame. And that's going to work a lot better as a primary interview. And now you can see his leading or looking room is off to the side with the greater amount of space.
Let me just grab a little snippet of this.
Poor Stephen got stuck being the character in all of these. So here you can see another big difference with a seated interview. When he's looking off this way, if the camera is slightly above eye level, he still looks fairly small in the frame, but at least the leading room or looking room is in the right place. And he's right at that rule of thirds line at the intersection. If we move a little farther, you notice moving the camera only a couple of feet makes a huge difference. Just slightly below eye level makes the subject appear larger, more dominant in the frame, whereas the opposite is true when you go slightly above eye level. You really lose a lot of it. Talking. But let me show you just a couple of others.
Look at this use of leading lines.
So here we're using leading lines. We stuck Isaac in the hallway, and not just leading lines, but look how far is the background behind him. Way down the hallway, right? And that creates a much more interesting visual. Now, if I wanted him to seem about our size, while these giant blank empty walls are not that interesting, how could I make him appear a bit more authoritative? Okay, so I could either go with a little bit closer. You notice the difference between moving closer. All of a sudden, those big blank walls don't feel quite as blank because he is taking up a lot more of the frame. Whereas when he was back here, he feels a lot smaller. So simply moving him closer to us or us moving the camera closer to him makes a world of difference if we're trying to make this the authority. In addition, look at these leading lines. Every one of them is leading their way right to our subject. His face is right on that top rule of thirds. His eyes are on the top rule of thirds. There's not too much headroom. It's a nice medium close-up shot from about the middle of the waist to just above the head. And watch what happens if the camera goes too high, though. How does the subject appear now? A little almost childlike, right? Not necessarily an authority. This is something that we're used to seeing people that are smaller than us looking like that, and so it looks a little funny. If we go the other way, though, now he's authoritative. This is a trick they have to use in films all the time with somebody like Tom Cruise, who is oftentimes shorter than his co-stars. And I guess the movie buying public is uncomfortable with that. So they have to structure their cameras in such a way as to make him appear at the same height or even taller. So you'll notice each one of those, the difference between that, where the person seems authoritative, and this, where they seem tiny, is literally a difference of 1 foot in where that camera is. And even right here, what's the problem with this one? Too much headroom. Why? Sticks his head right in the middle of the frame. We still have the right like medium close-up shot, but by having so much headroom, all of a sudden this person just seems tiny again. I see this problem on Zoom all the time. People that should know better, making themselves appear super tiny in their frame. If you are on a Zoom meeting and you want to be considered more authoritative, consider adjusting yourself in the frame to be able to convey that feeling. You'll notice this feels very different regardless of who the photo or video is of. All right, I think that was all those. And one last thing. In this case, we noticed that even though we brought this student a lot closer, so they're filling the frame, what about their headroom? I'm just going to start calling people to point things out. What else is working in this frame? Ryan, what other attributes did we bring into play? Okay, yep. Is he the dominant figure in the frame? Yes. What about the environment? Is he close or far from the background? Julia? Yes. Absolutely. The lines in the frame are all leading their way to your subject. Everything is, so that works. He's close, so he's filling the frame. Eyes are on the top rule of thirds. In this case, we set it up as just a head-on interview where he's speaking directly to the camera. Any other issues with this, though? How about the dynamic range difference between those windows in the background and him? You notice how he's fairly like washed out? Anytime we have a bright source of light like a window, especially where the sun was beaming right in, it can really be a problem for most cameras. Literally the biggest difference I've seen has been in the newest iPhones. The 13 and 14 Pro have better handling of dynamic range. But even still right here, he's very similar in contrast to the background. So what could you do in this situation? Well, not a lot, but what we did do was we grabbed a couple other people's phones, flipped on the flashlights, tried some different adjustments, moving them around, and so we could use them as a fill light and got mine even a little bit closer to him. And so now with a phone just inches out of frame with the flashlight on his face, you see it was able to create just enough what we call key light or fill light on him that now he stands out. Look at the difference between that, where he's much more washed out, and this, where he's much more present in the frame. Make sense? So our task today is for you to go out and shoot a couple of different environments. We're going to go out there and try a couple of these shots of our own, and then you're going to pick a partner and go and try to capture a great looking medium shot, appropriate use of the rule of thirds, background as far from them as you can. Take note of the environment. If you can frame them properly with something in the environment, that's great. Otherwise, we can go for making things very far behind them. We'll try to make use of the rule of thirds. We want to make sure that we place them either on their eyes on that top rule of thirds basically every time. But we want them to appear typically, unless you're telling a story where they're supposed to be small or lacking authority, we want to have it at least eye level or slightly below eye level, which will make the subject appear larger in our frame. You're going to capture audio with a second phone. They can just use their own phone and speak into it if they want. Or if you go for a sitting down interview, you can sit down and just place the mic close and capture with a voice memo. Make sure that you, when you go to record on both, slate it by saying, take one, and give yourself that big, nice spike to be able to do it. The reason we say something right off the bat when both are recording is so you can find it. There is no greater pain in the butt than having a pile of audio clips and you have to click them open. They don't immediately say what they are, and you just have to sit and listen, hoping that you hear something that you also heard in a video clip that you've opened too. So by saying take one, take two, anytime you start and stop, you only need to say it once for every time you start and stop. If you forget, do it at the end right before you stop, because then you can say, and you can scroll to the end and line up those spikes at the end. We call them tail sticks. All right, so we're going to go out in the other room right now. I'm going to stop recording on this so that we've got this for next semester or anybody that missed.